Pop open a bottle of bubbly. Yeah. Here's to another goddamn new year. And outside, 2 million drunk Bostonians are getting ready to sing Auld Lang Syne out of tune. I sit there in my easy chair, looking at the clouds, orange with celebration. I wonder if you're out there. Hey! The ice of Boston is muddy and reflects no light midday or night. And I slip on it every time. Pop open the third bottle of bubbly. Yeah, and I take that bottle of champagne, go into the kitchen, stand in front of the kitchen window, and I take all my clothes off, take that bottle of champagne, and I pour it on my head, feel a cascade through my hair and across my chest, and the phone rings. And it's my mother. And she says, "Hi, honey, how's Boston?" And I stand there all alone on New Year's Eve, buck naked, drenched in champagne, looking at a bunch of strangers, looking at them, looking at me, looking at them, and I say, "Oh, fine, Mom. How's Washington? Hey, the ice of Boston is muddy and reflects no light midday or night, and I slip on it every time. Hey, the ice of Boston is muddy and reflects no light midday or night, and I slip on it every time, yeah." So I guess the party line is I followed you up here. Well, I don't know about that. Mainly because knowing about that would involve knowing about some pathetic, ridiculous, and absolutely true things about myself. I'd rather not admit to right now. I woke up at 3 a.m. with the radio on, that Gladys Knight and the Pip song on, about how she'd rather live in his world with him than live in her own world alone. And I laid there, head spinning, trying to fall asleep, and I thought to myself, "Oh, Gladys, girl, I love you, but oh, get a life! Hey, the ice of Boston is muddy and reflects no light midday or night, and I slip on it every time. Hey, the ice of Boston is muddy and reflects no light midday or night, and I slip on it every time. Time, time, time. Time, time, time. Time, time, time. Time, time, time.
Well has lifted her veil back to cover her skull like a bride. Since she threw away her pipes and bowls and screens again this AM, she's going to have to be resourceful. On the counter of an old sink, the same not quite white as the floor and ceiling, the wallpaper is a maddening, uncountable pattern of roses twined in garlands on sticks. On the counter are an old spray bristle toothbrush, tube of gleam rolled neatly up from the bottom, unsavory old no coat scraper, rubber cement, Negram, depilatory ointment, tube of monostat not squeezed from the bottom, phony beard, whisker bits, and curled green threads of used mint floss and parapactolin, and a wholly unsqueezed tube of diaphragm foam, and no makeup but serious styling gel in a big jar with no lid and hairs around the rim, and an empty tampon box half filled with nickels and pennies and rubber bands. And Joelle sweeps an arm across the counter and squunches everything over to the side under the small rod with a washcloth wrung viciously out and dried in the tight spiral of a twisted cord. And if some items do totter and fall to the floor, it is all right because everything eventually has to fall. On the clear counter goes Joelle's misshapen purse. The absence of veil dulls the bathroom smell somehow. She's been resourceful before, but this is the most deliberate Joelle has been able to be about it in something like a year. From the purse, she removes the plastic Pepsi container, a box of wooden matches kept dry in a resealable baggie, two little thick glycine bags, each holding 4 grams of pharmaceutical grade cocaine, a single edged razor blade, increasingly tough to find, a little black Kodachrome canister whose gray lid she pops and discards to reveal baking soda, sifted fine as talc, the empty glass cigar tube, a folded square of Reynolds wrap foil the size of a playing card, and an amputated length of the bottom of a quality wire coat hanger. The overhead light casts shadows of her hands over what she needs, so she turns on the light over the medicine cabinet's mirror as well. The light stutters and hums and bathes the counter with cold lithium free fluorescence. She undoes the 4 pins and removes the veil from her head and places it on the counter with the rest of the material. Lady Delphina's little glycine baglets have clever seals that are green when sealed and blue and yellow when not. She taps half a glycine's worth into the cigar tube and adds half again as much baking soda, spilling some of the soda in a parenthesis of bright white on the counter. This is the most deliberate she's been able to be in at least a year. She turns the sink's C knob and lets the water get really cold, then cranks the volume back to a trickle and fills the rest of the tube to the top with water. She holds the tube up straight and gently taps on its side with a blunt, unpainted nail, watching the water slowly darken the powders beneath it. She produces a double rose of flame in the mirror that illuminates the right side of her face as she holds the tube over the match's flame and waits for the stuff to begin to bubble. She uses 2 matches twice. When the tube gets too hot to hold, she takes and folds her veil and uses it as a kind of oven mitt over the fingers of her left hand, careful, from habit and experience, not to let the bottom corners get close enough to the flame to brown. After it's bubbled for just a second, Joelle shakes out the matches with a flourish and tosses them in the toilet to hear that briefest of hisses. She takes up the black wire prod from the hanger and begins to stir and mash the just bubbled stuff in the tube, feeling it thicken quickly and its resistance to the wire's tiny circles increase. It was when her hands started to tremble during this part of the cooking procedure that she'd first known she liked this more than anyone can like anything and still live. She's not stupid. The Charles rolling away far below the windowless bathroom is vividly blue, more mildly blue on top from the fresh rainwater that had made purple rings appear and widen, a deeper magic marker type blue below the dilute layer, gulls stamped to the cleared sky, motionless as kites. A bulky thump sounds from behind the large flat-top Enfield hill on the river's south shore, a large but relatively shapeless projectile of drums wrapped in brown postal paper and belted with twine, hurtling in a broad upward arc that bothers the gulls into dips and wheels. The brown package quickly a pinpoint in the yet hazy sky to the north, where a yellow-brown cloud hangs just above the line between sky and terrain, its top slowly dispersing and opening out so that the cloud looks like a not very pretty sort of wastebasket waiting. Inside, Joelle hears only a bit of the bulky thump, which could be anything. The only other thing besides what she's about to do too much of here right now she'd ever come close to feeling this way about in Joelle's childhood. Paducah, not too bad a drive from Shiny Prize, still had a few public movie theaters, 6 and 8 separate auditoria clustered in single honeycombs at the edges of interstate malls. The theaters always ended in plex, she reflected. The thysoplex and thatoplex, thisoplex and thatoplex. It had never struck her as odd. And she never saw even one film there as a girl that she didn't just about die with love for. It didn't matter what they were. She and her own personal daddy, up in the front row, they sat in the front rows of the narrow little over insulated plexus up in Neck Crick territory and let the screen fill their whole visual field. Her hand in his lap and their box of Cracker Jacks in her hand and soda pops secure in little rings cut out of the plastic of their seat's arms, and he, always with a wooden match in the corner of his mouth, pointing up into the rectangular world at this one or that one, performers, giant, flawless 2D beauties, Irides sent on the screen, telling Joelle over and over again how she was prettier than this one or that one right there. Standing in the placid line as he bought the plexus paper tickets that looked like grocery receipts, knowing that she was going to love the celluloid entertainment no matter what it was, wonderfully innocent, still thinking quality referred to the living teddy bears in Qantas commercials, standing handheld, eyes even with his wallet's back pocket bulge, she never so much again as in that line felt so taken care of, destined for big screen entertainment's unalloyed good fun, never once again until starting in with this lover, cooking and smoking it 5 years back before Incandenza's death at the start. The punter never made her feel quite so taken care of, never made her feel about to be entered by something that didn't know she was there and yet was all about making her feel good anyway, coming in. Entertainment is blind. The improbable thing of the whole thing is that when the soda and water and cocaine are mixed right and heated right and stirred just right as the mix cools down, then when the stuff's too stiff to steer and it's finally ready to come on out, it comes out slick as shit from a goat. Just an inverted ketchup bottle thump, and out the son of a fucking horse slides, one molded cylinder hard-eamed onto the black wire, its snout round from the glass tube's bottom. The average pre-chopped freebase rock looks like a 38 round. What Joel now slides with 3 Phillips from the cigar tube is a monstrous white wiener, a county fair corn dog. Its side's a bit rough, like mache, a couple clots left on the inside of the tube that are what you forage and smoke before the chore boys and panties. She's now a little under 2 deliberate minutes from too much fun for any one mortal to hope to endure. Her unveiled face in the dirty lit mirror is shocking in the intensity of its absorption. Out in the bedroom doorway, she can hear Reeves, Mainwaring, telling some helium voiced girl that life is essentially one long search for an ashtray. Too much fun. She uses the razor blade to cross section chunks out of the freebase wiener. You can't whittle thin deli shaved flakes off because they'll crumble back to powder right away, and they anyway don't smoke as well as you'd think. Blunt chunks are SOP. Joelle chops out enough chunks for maybe 20 good sized hits. They form a little quarry on the soft cloth of her folded veil on the counter. Her Brazilian skirt is no longer damp. Reeves Mainwaring's blonde Imperial often had little bits of food residue in it. The ecstasy of St. Teresa's is on perpetual display at the Vittoria in Rome, and she never got to see it. She will never again say, and lo, and invite people to watch darkness dance on the face of the deep. The face of the deep had been the title she suggested for Jim's unseen last cartridge, which he'd said would be too pretentious, and then use that skull fragment out of the Hamlet graveyard scene instead. Which, talk about pretentious, she laughed. His frightened look when she laughed is, for the life of her, the last facial expression memory she can remember of the man. Orrin had referred to his father sometimes as himself, and sometimes as the mad stork, and once in a slip as the sad stork. She lights one wooden match and blows it right out, and touches the hot black head to the side of the plastic pop bottle. It melts right through and makes a little hole. The helicopter was probably a traffic helicopter. Somebody at their academy had some connection to some traffic helicopter that had an accident. She can't, for the life of her. No one out there knows she is in here, getting ready to have too much. She can hear Molly Notkin calling through rooms about, has anyone seen Keck? In her first theory seminar, Reeves Mainwaring had called one film wretchedly ill conceived and another desperately acquiescent. And Molly Notkin had pretended to have a coughing fit and had a Tennessee accent, and that was how they met. The Reynolds rep is to make a screen that will rest in the bottle's open top. A regular dope screen is the size of a thimble, its size spread like an opening bud. Joelle uses the point of some curved nail scissors on the back of the toilet to poke tiny holes in the rectangle of aluminum foil and shapes it into a shallow funnel large enough to siphon gasoline, narrowing its tip to fit in the bottle's mouth. She now owns a pipe with a monster sized bowl and screen now and puts in enough chunklets to make 5 or 6 hits at once. The little rocks lie there, piled and yellow white. She puts her lips experimentally to the melted hole in the side of the bottle and draws. Then, very deliberately, lights another match and extinguishes it and makes the hole bigger. The idea that she'll never see Mullinakin or the Cerebral Union or her UHID support brothers and sisters or the YYY engineer or Uncle Bud on a roof or her stepmother in the locked ward or her poor personal daddy again is sentimental and banal. The idea of what she's about in here contains all other ideas and makes them banal. Her glass of juice is on the back of the toilet, half empty. The back of the toilet is lightly sheened with condensation of unknown origin. These are facts. This room in this apartment is the sum of very many specific facts and ideas. There's nothing more to it than that. Deliberately setting about to make her heart explode has assumed the status of just one of these facts. It was an idea, but now is about to become a fact. The closer it comes to being becoming concrete, the more abstract it seems. Things get very abstract. The concrete room was the sum of abstract facts. Are facts abstract, or are they just abstract representations of concrete things? Molly Notkin's middle name is Cantrell. Drell puts 2 more matches together and prepares to strike them, breathing rapidly in and out like a diver preparing for a long descent. I say, is someone in there? The voice is the young post new formalist from Pittsburgh who affects Continental and wears an ascot that won't stay tight, with that hesitant knocking of when you know perfectly well someone's in there. The bathroom door, composed of 36 that 3 times a lengthwise 12, recessed 2 beveled squares in a warped rectangle of steam softened wood, not quite white. The bottom outside corner there, raw wood, mangled from hitting the cabinet's bottom drawer's wicked metal knob through the door, and offset red, and glowering actors, and calendar, and very crowded scene, and pubic spiral of pale blue smoke from the elephant colored rubble of ash, and little blackened chunks in the foil's funnel's cone. The smoke's baby blanket blue that sent her sliding down along the wall, past knotted washcloth, towel rack, blood, flour, wallpaper, and intricately grimed electrical outlet, the light, sharp, bitter tint of a heated sky's blue that's left her uprightly fetal with chin on knees in yet another North American bathroom. The veiled, too pretty for words, maybe the prettiest girl of all time. Prettiest, GOAT. Knees to chest, slew footed by the radiant chill of the claw footed tub's porcelain. Molly's had somebody lacquer the tub in blue lacquer. She's holding the bottle, recalling vividly its slogan for the last generation was the choice of a nude generation, when she was of back pocket height and prettier by far than any of the peach colored titans they gazed up at. His hand in her lap, her hand in the box, and rooting down past candy for the prize. More fun, way too much fun. Inside her veil, on the counter, above her, the stuff in the funnel, exhausted, though it's still smoking thinly, its graft reaching its highest spiked prick. Peak the arrow's best descent, so good she can't stand it, and reaches out for the cold tub rim's cold edge to pull herself up as the white party noise reaches for her, the sort of stereophonic precipice of volume to teeter on just before the speakers blow. People barely twitching, and conversations strettering against a ghastly old pre Carter thing saying, "We've only just begun." Joelle's limbs have been removed to a distance where their acknowledgement of her command seems like magic. Both clogs simply gone, nowhere in sight, and socks oddly wet. Pulls her face up to face the unclean medicine cabinet mirror, twin roses of flame still hanging in the glass's corner. Hair of the flames she's eaten now trailing like the legs of wasps through the air of the glass she uses to locate the defaced veil and what's inside it. Loading up the cone again, the ashes from the last load make the world's best filter. This is a fact. Breathes in and out like a savvy diver. Look here, then who's that in there? Is someone in there? Do open up. I'm on one foot, then the other out here. I say, Notkin, something's been in here locked in and, well, sounding unwell amid rather a queer scent. And is knelt vomiting over the lip of the cool blue tub, gouges on the tub's lip, revealing sandy white gritty stuff below the lacquer, and porcelain vomiting muddy juice and blue smoke and dots of mercuric red into the claw-footed trough. And can hear again and seems to see against the fire of her closed lids blood, bladed vessels aloft in the night to monitor flow, searchlit helicopters, fat fingers of blue light from one sky, searching. Enfield, Massachusetts is one of the stranger little facts that make up the idea that is Metro Boston because it is a township composed almost entirely of medical, corporate, and spiritual facilities, a kind of arm shape extending north from Commonwealth Avenue and separating Brighton into upper and lower, its elbow nudging East Newton's ribs, and its fist sunk into Alston. Enfield's broad municipal tax base includes St. Elizabeth's Hospital, Franciscan Children's Hospital, the Universal Bleacher Corporation, the Provident Nursing Home, Schuylkill Miss Medical Pressure Systems Incorporated, the Enfield Marine Public Health Hospital Complex, the Svelty Nail Corporation, have the Metro Boston Turbine and Generating Stations of Sunstrand Power and Light. The part that gets taxed is in incorporated Alston corporate headquarters for the ATH SCME family of air displacement effectuators, meaning they make really big fans, the Enfield Tennis Academy, St. John of God Hospital, Hanuman Orthopedic Hospital, the Leisure Time Ice Company, a Dicalcid monastery, the combined St. John's Seminary, and offices for the RCC's Boston Archdiocese, partly in Upper Brighton, never have text, convent headquarters of the Sisters for Africa, the National Craniofacial Pain Foundation, the Dr. George Roebling Runyon Memorial Institute for Podiatric Research, regional shiny truck, land barge, and catapult facilities for the ONA and subsidized Empire West Waste Displacement Company, what the Quebecois call Le Trebuchet Noir, spectacular block long catapults that make a sound like a giant stamping foot as they fling great twine bundled waste vehicles into the subannular regions of the great concavity at a parabolic altitude exceeding 5 kilometers. The device's slings are of alloy belted elastic, and they're huge cup vehicle receptacles like catcher's mitts from hell. A half dozen or so of the catapults in this like blimp hangarish thing with a selectively slide backable roof, taking up a good 6 square blocks of Enfield's form incursion into the Alston Spur, occasional school tours tolerated but not encouraged, and so on. With the whole flexed Enfield limb sleeved in the perimeter layer of light residential and mercantile properties. The Enfield Tennis Academy occupies probably now the nicest side in Enfield, some 10 years after balding and shaving flat the top of the big abrupt hill that constitutes a kind of raised cyst on the township's elbow. The better part of 75 hectares of broad lawns and clover leafing paths and topologically cutting edge erections, 32 asphalt tennis courts and 16 hard true composition tennis courts, and extensive underground maintenance and storage and athletic training facilities and briars and calliops and pines mixed artfully in on the inclines with deciduous trees, the ETA hilltop overlooking on one side, East Historic Commonwealth's Avenue, acclimated migration out of the squalor of Lower Brighton, liquor stores, laundromats, bars, and palisades of somber and guano dabbled tenement facades, the huge and brooding Brighton project high rises with 3 story high orange ID numerals on the sides, plus liquor stores and pale men in leather and whole gangs of pale children in leather on the corners and Greek owned pizza places with yellow walls and dirty corner markets owned by Orientals who try like heck to keep their sidewalk clean but can't. Even with those, even with hoses, plus the quarter hourly trundle and ding of the Green Line trains labor up the avenue's long rise to Boston College, into the spiky elegance of BC and the broad gentrification of Newton, out to the west where the haze haloed Boston sun drops behind the last node in the 4 kilometer sine wave that is collectively called the historic April Marathon's Heartbreak Hill, the sun always setting 15 minutes to the nanosecond after DeLint turns on the court's high tower lights. To I think it must be the southwest, ETA overlooks the steely gray tangle of Sunstrand's transformers and high voltage grid and coaxial chokers strung with beads of ceramic insulators with no with not one Sunstrand smokestack anywhere in sight, but a monstrous mega ohm insulator cluster at the terminus of a string of signs trailing in from the northeast, each sign talking with many ohms about how many annular generated amps are waiting underground for anyone who digs or in any way dicks around, with hair raising nonverbal stick figure symbols of somebody with a shovel going up like a Kleenex in the fireplace. There are smokestacks in the visual background slightly south of Sunstrand, though, from the EWD hangars, each stack with a monstrous ATH SCME 2100 series ADE fan bolted behind it and blowing due north with an insistent high pitched fury that is somehow soothing orally at ETA's distance and height. From both the north and northeast tree lines, ETA looks down on its hill's steepest, best planted decline into the complexly decaying grounds of Enfield Marine. November 5th year of the Depend adult undergarment. The transparent phone sounded from somewhere under the hill of bedding as Hal was on the edge of the bed with one leg up and his chin on its knee, clipping his nails into a wastebasket that sat several meters away in the middle of the room. It took 4 rings to find the receiver in the bedding and to pull the antenna out. Hello? Mr. Incredenza, this is the Enfield Raw Sewage Commission, and quite frankly, we've had enough shit out of you. Hello, Orrin. How hangs it, kid? Oh, God, please, oh, please, oh, not more separatism questions. Relax, never crossed my mind. Social call, shoot the breeze. Interesting you should call just now because I'm clipping my toenails into a wastebasket several meters away. Oh, Jesus, you know how I hate the sound of nail clippers. Except I'm shooting 70+%, the little fragments of clipping. It's uncanny. I keep wanting to go out in the hall and get somebody in here to see it, but I don't want to break the spell. The fragile magic spell feel of those intervals where it feels you can't miss. It's definitely one of those can't miss intervals. It's just like that magical feeling on those rare days out there playing out of your head, the Lind calls it. Loach calls it the zone, being in the zone. Those days when you feel perfectly calibrated and coordinated as God. Some groove in the shape of the air of the day guides everything down and in. When you feel like you couldn't miss if you tried to. I'm so far away, the wastebasket's mouth looks more like a slot than a circle, and yet in they go. Ka-ching, ka-ching. There went another one. Even the misses are near misses, carooms off the rim. I'm sitting here with the leg in the whirlpool in the bathroom of a Norwegian deep tissue therapist ranch style house, 1,100 meters up in the Superstition Mountains, Mesa Scottsdale, and flames far below. The bathroom's redwood paneled and overlooks a precipice. The sunlight's the color of the bronze. But you never know when the magic will descend on you. You never know when the grooves will open up. And once the magic descends, you don't want to change even the smallest detail. You don't know what concordance of factors and variables yields that calibrated can't miss feeling. And you don't want to soil the magic by trying to figure it out. But you don't want to change your grip, your stick, your side of the court, your angle of incidence to the sun. Your heart's in your throat every time you change sides of the court. You start to get a little like a superstitious native. What's the word? Propitiate the divine spell. I suddenly understand the Gesundheit impulse, the salt over the shoulder, and apotropaic barn signs. I'm actually frightened to switch feet right now. I'm clipping off the tiniest aerodynamically viable clippings possible to prolong the time on this foot in case the magic's function of the foot. This isn't even the good foot. These can't miss intervals make superstitious natives out of all of us, Allie. The professional football players may be the worst superstitious native of all the sport. That's why all the high tech padding and garish lycra and complex play terminology, the like self assuring display of high tech, because the bug eyed natives lurking just under the surface, we know. The bug eyed, spare, rattling, grass skirted primitive, feeding virgins to Popocatepec and afraid of planes. The new discursive OED says the Ots of Vancouver used to cut virgins' throats and pour the blood very carefully into the orifices of the embalmed bodies of their ancestors. I can hear those clippers. Quit with the clippers a second. The phone's no longer wedged under my jaw. I can even do it one handed, holding the phone in one hand, but it's all still on the same foot. You don't know from true bug eyed athletic superstition till you hit the pro ranks, Hallie. When you hit the show is when you'll understand primitive. Winning streaks bring the native bubbling up to the surface. Jockstraps unwashed game after game until they stand up by themselves in the overhead luggage compartments of planes, bizarrely ritualized dressing, eating, peeing. Micturition. Picture a 200-kilo interior lineman insisting on sitting down to pee. Don't even ask what wives and girlfriends have to suffer during a can't miss winning streak. I don't want to hear sexual stuff. Then there are the players who write down exactly what they say to everybody before a game. So if it's a magical can't miss type game, they can say exactly the same thing to the same people in the exact same order before the next game. Apparently, the odds tried to fill up ancestors' body completely with virgin blood to preserve the privacy of their own mental states. The opposite ad dictum here being, quote, the sated ghost cannot see secret things. The discursive OED postulates that this is one of the earlier on record prophylactic against schizophrenia. Hey, Hallie, after a burial, rural Papua New region Quebecers purportedly drill a small hole down from ground level all the way down through the lid of the coffin to let out the soul, if it wants out. Hey, Hallie, I um, I think I'm being followed. This is the big moment. I've totally exhausted the left foot finally, and I'm switching to the right foot. This will be the real test of the fragility of the spell. I said I'm being followed. Well, some men are born to lead. Oh, I'm serious. And here's the weird part. Well, here's the part that explains why you're sharing this with your estranged little brother instead of with anybody whose credulity you'd actually value. Well, the weird part is I think I'm being followed by handicapped people. 2 for 3 on the right foot with one curm. Jury's still out. Quit with the clipping a second. I'm not kidding. Take the other day. I strike up a conversation with a certain subject in line in the post office. I notice a guy in a wheelchair behind us. No big deal. Are you listening? What are you doing going to the post office? You hate snail mail. And you quit mailing the moms the pseudo form replies 2 years ago, Mario says. But so the conversation goes well and hits it off. Seduction strategies 12 and 16 are employed, which I'll tell you about sometime at length. The point is, the subject and I walk out together, hitting it off, and there's another guy in a wheelchair whittling in the shade of a shop awning just down the street. Okay, still not necessarily any kind of deal, but now the subject and I drive to her trailer park. Phoenix has trailer parks? Not those silverish metal trailers. So, but we get out of the car, and across the park's lot, here's another wheelchaired guy trying to maneuver in the gravel and not making a very good job of it. Doesn't Arizona have more than its share of the old and infirm? But none of these handicapped guys were old, and they were all awfully burly for guys in wheelchairs. And 3 in an hour is kind of stretching it. I was thinking, I always picture you having your little trysts in more domestic suburban settings, or else tall motels with exotically shaped beds. Do women in metal trailers even have small children? This one had very sweet little twin girls who played very quietly with blocks without supervision the whole time. Cockle warming, oh. And but so the point is I decamped the trailer like X number of hours later and the guy's still there, mired in gravel. And in the distance I could swear he's got on some kind of domino mask. And now everywhere I go, the last several days, there seems to be a statistically improbable number of wheelchaired figures around lurking, somehow just a little too nonchalantly. Very shy fans, possibly? Some club of leg dysfunctional people all obsessed in that shy fan like way with one of the first North American sports figures people think of in connection with the word leg? Ah, it's probably my imagination. Anyways, a dead bird fell in my jacuzzi. But now let me ask you a couple of questions. This all wasn't even why I originally called. But you brought up trailer parks and trailers. I need to confirm some suspicious 2 points. Right in there, ka-ching. Never having been in a trailer, and even the discursive OED having pretty much of a lacuna where trailer park trailers are concerned. And this is the one supposedly non bats family member I call. If this is how I reach out to you, it'd be whom, I think. But this trailer, this lady you met trailer, confirm or deny the following. Its carpet was wall to wall and extremely thin, a kind of burnt yellow or orange. Yes. The living room or like den area contained some sort of the following: a black velvet painting featuring an animal, a videophonic diorama on some sort of knickknack shelf, a needlepoint sampler with some kind of frothy biblical saw on it, at least one piece of chintz furniture with protective doilier on the arms, a smoke bee gone air filtration ashtray, the last couple of years Reader's Digest neatly displaced in their own special inclined magazine rec. Check on velvet painting of leopard. Sampler sofa with doilies ashtray. No Reader's Digest. This isn't especially funny, Hallie. The moms comes out in you these odd little ways sometimes. Last one. The trailer person's name. Jean, May, Nora, Vera, Nora Jean, or Vera May? That was my question. I guess I'll have to get back on you on that. Boy, you really put the small R in romance, don't you? But why I'm calling, it's not clear whether the fragile can't miss magic still enforced on the right foot. I'm 7'9", but there's a whole different feel of somebody deliberately trying to get them in. Hallie, I've got somebody from Moment fucking magazine out here doing a quote soft profile. You've got what? A human interest thing on me as a human. Moment doesn't do hard sports, this lady says. They're more people oriented, human interest. It's for something called, quote, people right now, a section. Moment's a supermarket checkout lane display magazine. It's in there with the Rodneys and gum. Lateral Alice Moore reads it. It's all over CT's waiting room. They did a thing on the little blind Illinois kid Thorpe thought so well of. Hal. I think lateral Alice spends a lot of time in grocery store checkout lanes, which, if you think about it, are almost the ideal environment for her. Hal! Being that she can't just locomote sideways right on through. Hallie, this physically imposing moment's girl's asking all these soft profile esque family background questions. She wants to know about himself? Everybody, you, the mad stork, the moms. It's gradually emerging. It's going to be some sort of memorial to the stork as a patriarch. Everybody's talents and accomplishments profiled as some sort of a refracted tribute to El Storco's careers. Well, he always did cast a long shadow, you said. Of course, and my first thought is to invite her to go piss up a string, but Moment's been in touch with the team. The front office has indicated a soft profile would be positive for the team. Cardinal Stadium isn't exactly groaning under the weight of all the fannies, winning streak or no. I've also thought of referring her to Bain. Let Bain rant at her or send her letters just trying to unparse for quotes. Take her a month. Her as in female? Not your typical Oren type subject. A hardened, fast lane, gum cracking, maybe even small childless journalist type female in from New York on the red eye. Plus, you said imposing. Nah, not all that tough or hard, but physically imposing. Large, but not unerotic. A girl and a half in all directions. A girl to dominate the space of any trailer she lives in. Enough with the trailerisms. The strained quality is me trying to speak and pick chrome toenail pairings up off the floor at the same time. The girl's immune to most of your standard conversational distractions. Ah, you're afraid you're losing your touch. An immune girl and a half. I said distraction, not seduction. You kind of wisely avoid any female who you suspect could beat you up if things came down to that. Ah, she's more imposing than like most of our starting backfield, but weirdly sexy. The linemen are gaga. The tackles keep making all these cracks about does she maybe want to see their hard profile? Let's hope her prose is better than whoever did that human interest thing on the blind kid last spring. Have you bounced this new fear of the handicapped off her? Listen, you of all people should know I have zero intent of forthrightly answering any stained family linen type questions from anybody, much less somebody who takes shorthand, physical charms or no. You and tennis, you and the Saints, himself and tennis, the moms and Quebec and Royal Victoria, the moms and immigration, himself and annulation, himself and Lyle, himself and distilled spirits, himself killing himself, you and Joel, himself and Joel, the moms and CT, you versus the moms, ETA, non existent films, etc. But you can see how it's all going to get me thinking. How to avoid being forthright about the stork material unless I know what the really forthright answers could be. Everybody said you'd regret not coming to the funeral, but I don't think this is what they meant. For example, the stork took himself down before CT moved in upstairs at HMH or after. This is you asking me? Don't make this appalling for me, Hal. I wouldn't dream of even trying. Uh, it was immediately before, 2, 3 days before CT had what's now the Linz room next to Stitzen in Commonwealth administration. And Dad knew they were very close. I don't know, oh. You don't know? Mario might know. Like to chew the fat with Boo Boo on this one, oh? Don't make this like this, Hallie. And Dad, the mad stork put his head in the oven. The microwave, oh. The rotisserie microwave over next to the fridge on the freezer side on the counter under the cabinet with the plates and bowls and to the left of the fridge as you face the fridge. A microwave oven. Yeah, it is a rock and Wilco. Nobody ever said microwave. Well, I think it came out generally at the funeral. I keep getting your point if you're wondering. So where was he found then? 20 for 28. Is that what, 65%? It's not like this, all that. The microwave was in the kitchen. I already explained. Oh, all right. All right. So, okay, now, who would you say speaks most about the guy keep his family alive verbally the most? Now, I mean, you, CT, or the moms? Well, I think it's a three-way tie. So it's never mentioned. Nobody talks about him. It's taboo. But you seem to be forgetting somebody. Mario talks about him, about it. Well, sometimes. To what and or who all this talking? Well, to me for one, I suppose. And so do you talk about it, but only to him and only after he initiates it? Oren, I lied. I haven't even started on the right foot yet. I've been too afraid to change my angle of approach to the nails. The right foot's a whole different angle of approach. I'm afraid the magic is left foot dependent. I'm like your superstitious lineman talking about it's broken the spell. Now I'm self-conscious and afraid. I've been sitting here on the edge of the bed with my right knee up under my chin, poised, studying the foot, frozen with aboriginal terror, and lying about it to my own brother. Can I ask you who it was who found him? Who found him at the oven? Well, found by one Harold James in Cadenza, 13, going on really old. You? You were who found him? Not the moms? Listen, may I ask why this sudden interest after 4 years? 216 days, and with 2 years of that, not even once even calling? I've already said I don't feel safe not answering Helen's questions if I haven't got a handle on what I'm not saying. Helen, so you did. That's why. I'm still frozen by the way. The self consciousness that kills the magic is getting worse and worse. This is why Pemulas and trolls always seem to let a lead slip away. The standard term is tightening up. The clippers are poised, blades on either side of the nail. I just can't achieve the unconsciousness to actually clip. Maybe it was cleaning up the few that missed. Suddenly, the wastebasket seems small and far away. I've lost the magic by talking about it instead of just giving into it. Launching the nail out toward the wastebasket now seems like an exercise in telemacry. You mean telemetry? How embarrassing when the skills go, they go. Listen, Hal, why don't you go ahead and ask me whatever standard ghoulish questions you want not to answer. This may be your only shot. Usually, I seem not to talk about it. Was she there? The PGOAT, P-goat? Joel hadn't been around the ground since you two split up. You knew about that. Himself met her at the brownstone shooting. I'm sure you know way more about whatever it was they were trying to make, Joel and himself. Himself went underground too. CT was already doing most of the day to day administration. Himself was down in that little post production closet off the lab for like a solid month. Mario would bring food and essentials down. Sometimes he'd eat with Lyle. I don't think he came up to ground level for at least a month, except for just one trip out to Belmont to McLean's for a 2 day purge and detox. This was about a week after he came back. He'd flown off somewhere for 3 days for what the impression I get was work related, business, film related. If Lyle didn't go with him, Lyle went somewhere because he wasn't in the weight room. I know Mario didn't go with him and didn't know what was up. Mario doesn't lie. It was unclear whether he'd finished whatever he was editing, himself, I mean. He stopped living on April 1st. If you weren't sure, that was the day. I can tell you on April 1st, he wasn't back by the time PM matches started because I'd been around the lab door right after lunch and he wasn't back. He went in for another detox, you said? In what, March? The moms herself emerged and risked exterior transit and took him herself, so I gather was urgent. He quit drinking in January, Hal. It was something Joelle was really specific about. She called even after we'd agreed not to call and told me about it even after I said I didn't want to hear about him if she was going to still be in his things. She said he hadn't had a drop in weeks. It was her condition for letting him put her in what he was doing. She said he said he'd do anything. Well, I don't know what to tell you. By this time, it was hard to tell whether he'd been ingesting anything or not. Apparently, at a certain point, it stops making a difference. Did he have film related things with him when he flew somewhere? A film case, equipment? Oh, I didn't see him leave and I didn't see him come back. He wasn't around by match time, I know. Freer beat me badly and fast. It was 4-1 and 4-2 something, and we were the first ones done. I came around HMH to do an emergency load of laundry before dinner. This was around 1630. I came over and came in and noticed something right away and found him. And went to get the moms, then changed my mind and went to get CT, then changed my mind, went to get Lyle. But the first authority figure I ran into was Stitt, who was irreproachably brisk and efficient and sensible about everything and turned out to be just the authority figure to go get in the first place. I don't even think a microwave oven would go on unless the door was closed. What with microwaves oscillating all over inside, I thought there was like a refrigerator light or read only tab like device. Well, you seem to be forgetting the technical ingenuity of the person we're talking about. Yeah. And you were probably shocked, traumatized. He was asphyxiated, irritated, and burnt. As we later reconstructed the scene, he'd used a wide bit drill and small hacksaw to make a head sized hole in the oven door. Then, when he'd gotten his head in, he'd carefully packed the extra space around his neck with wadded up aluminum foil. Mm, sounds like kind of an ad hoc and jerry rigged and haphazard. Everybody's a critic. This wasn't an aesthetic endeavor. There was a large and a half bottle of wild turkey found on the counter not far away, with a large red decorative gift wrappage bow on the neck. On the bottle's neck, you mean? That is a rog. As in he hadn't been sober after all? Well, that would seem to follow, oh. And he left no note or living will type video or communique of any kind? Oh, I know you know very well he did not. You're now asking me stuff I know you know, besides criticizing him and making sobriety claims when you weren't anywhere near the scene or the funeral. Are we just about through here? I've got a whole long nailed foot waiting for me here. As you reconstructed the scene, you just said. Also, it just hit me I've got a library book I was supposed to return. I've forgotten all about it. Reconstructed the scene, as in the scene when you found him was somehow deconstructed. You, of all people, you know that was the one word he hated more than. So burned then. Just say it. He was really badly burned. No, wait, asphyxiated. The packed foil was to preserve the vacuum in a space that got automatically evacuated as soon as the magnetron started oscillating and generating the microwaves. Magnetron? What do you know about magnetrons and oscillators? Aren't you the brother of mine who was to be reminded which way to turn the ignition key in a car? Brief liaison with this one subject who used to model at kitchen appliance trade shows. It was kind of a brutal brand of modeling. She'd stand there on a huge rotating lazy Susan in a one piece with one thigh turned in and had a hand out, palm up, indicating the appliance next to her. Stood there smiling and spinning day after day. She'd stagger around half the evening trying to get her balance back. Well, did this subject by any chance explain to you how microwaves actually cook things? Or have you, for example, say ever like baked a potato in a microwave oven? Did you know you have to cut the potato open before you turn the oven on? Do you know why that is? Jesus. The PDP field pathologist said the buildup of internal pressures would have been almost instantaneous and equivalent in kilogram centimeter to over 2 sticks of TNT. Jesus Christ, Hallie. Hence the need to reconstruct the scene. Jesus. Don't feel bad. There's no guarantee anybody would have told you, even if you'd popped in for, say, the memorial service. I, for one, wasn't exactly a jabberjaw at the time. I seem to have been evincing shock and trauma throughout the whole funeral period. What I mostly recall is a great deal of quiet talk about my psychic well being. It got so I kind of enjoyed popping in and out of rooms just to enjoy the quiet conversation, stopping in mid clause. Oh, you must have been traumatized beyond fucking belief. Well, your concern is much appreciated, believe me. Trauma seems to have been the consensus. It turns out Rusk and the moms had begun interviewing top flight trauma and grief counselors for me within hours after it happened. I was shunted directly into concentrated grief and trauma therapy 4 days a week for over a month, right in the April to May gearing up for summer tour period. I lost 2 spots on the 14th ladder just because of all the PM matches I missed. I missed the hardcore qualies and could have missed Indianapolis if I hadn't finally figured out the grief and trauma therapy process. But it helped. I mean, ultimately, the grief therapy. The therapy ended up taking place in that professional building right up on Commonwealth Avenue past the Sunstrand Plaza by Lake Street, the one with bricks the color of a Thousand Island dressing we all run by 4 days a week. Who was to know one of the continent's top grief men was right up the street? The moms didn't want the process going on too far from the old web, if need be, I'm sure. This grief counselor insisted I call him by his first name, which I forget. A large red meaty character with eyebrows at a demonic looking synclinal angle and very small nubbly gray teeth and a mustache. He always had the remains of a sneeze in his mustache. I got to know that mustache very well. His face had that same blood pressure flush CT's face gets. And let's not even get into the man's hands. The moms had Rusk shunt you to a top grief pro so she wouldn't have to feel guilty about practically sawing the hole in the microwave door herself, among other little guilt and anti guilt operations. She always did believe himself was doing more with Joelle than work. Poor old himself, never had eyes for anybody but the moms. Yeah, this was one tough hombre. Oh, this grief counselor. He made a Rusk session look like a day on the Adriatic. He wouldn't let up. How did it feel? How does it feel? How do you feel when I ask you how it feels? Rusk always reminded me of a freshman fumbling with some subject's bra, the way she'd sort of tuck and fumble at your head. The man was unsatisfiable and scary. Those eyebrows, that hammer in face, bland little eyes. He never once turned his face away or looked away at anything but right at me. It was the most brutal 6 weeks of full bore professional conversation anybody could imagine. With fucking CT already moving his collection of platform shoes and unconvincing hairpieces and Stairmaster in upstairs at HMH already. The whole thing was nightmarish. I just could not figure out what the guy wanted. I went down and chewed through the Copley Square Library's grief section, not disc, the actual books. I read Kübler-Ross, Hinton. I slogged through Kastenbaum and Kastenbaum. I read things like Elizabeth Harper Nell's Seven Choices Taking the Steps to New Life After Losing Someone You Love, which was 352 pages of sheer goo. I went in and presented with textbook perfect symptoms of denial, bargaining, anger, still more denial, depression. I listed my 7 textbook choices and vacillated plausibly between and among them. I provided etymological data on the word acceptance all the way back to Wycliffe and 14th century Languedoc French. The grief therapist was having none of it. It was like one of those final exams and nightmares where you prepare immaculately and then you get there and all the exam questions are in Hindi. I even tried telling him himself was miserable and pancreatitic and out of his tree half the time, by then away and anyway, and that he and the moms were basically estranged, that even work and wild turkey weren't helping anymore, that he was despondent about something he was editing that turned out so bad he didn't want it released, that what happened was probably kind of a mercy in the end. Himself didn't suffer then. In the microwave, the PPD field pathologist who drew the chalk lines around himself's shoes on the floor said maybe 10-second stops. He said the pressure buildup would have been almost instantaneous. Then he gestured at the kitchen walls. Then he threw up. I'm talking about the field pathologist. Jesus Christ, Ellie. But the grief therapist was having none of it. The at least his sufferings over angle that Kastenbaum said is basically a neon bright sign of real acceptance. This grief therapist hung on like a gala monster. I even tried telling him I really didn't feel anything, which was fiction. Of course it was fiction. What could I do? I was panic stricken. This guy was a nightmare. His face just hung there over his desk like a hypertensive moon, never turning away, with this glistening mucoidal dew in his mustache. And don't even ask me about his hands. He was my worst nightmare. Talk about self consciousness and fear. He was a top rank authority figure, and I was failing to supply what he wanted. He made it manifestly clear I wasn't delivering the goods. I'd never failed to deliver the goods before. You were our designated deliverer, Hallie, no question about it. But here was this authority figure with top credentials and frames over every square centimeter of his walls, who sat there and refused even to define what the goods here would be. Say what you will about Stitt and Delint, they let you know what they want in no uncertain terms. Flopman, Trewaf, Prickett, Nwangi, Fentress, Lingley, Pettyjohn, Ogilvy, Leaf, even the moms in her way, they tell you on the very first day of class what they want from you. But this son of a bee right here, no dice. You must have been in shock the whole time, too. Oh, it got worse and worse. I dropped weight. I couldn't sleep. This was when the nightmare started. I kept dreaming of a face in the floor. I lost to fear again, then to coil. I went 3 sets with Trelch. I got B's on 2 different quizzes. I couldn't concentrate on anything. I'd become obsessed with the fear that I was somehow going to flunk grief therapy. That this profession was going to tell Ruskin, Stitt, and CT and the moms that I couldn't deliver the goods. I'm sorry I couldn't be there. The odd thing was, the more obsessed I got, the worse I played and slept, the happier everybody got. The grief therapist complimented me on how haggard I was looking. Rusk told the Lint, the grief therapist told the moms that it was starting to work, that I was starting to grieve, but that it was a long process, long and costly. Roger, I began to despair. I began to foresee somehow getting left back in grief therapy, never delivering the goods, and it never ending, having this Kafkaesque interfaces with this man, day after day, week after week. It was now May. The Continental Clays I'd gotten all the way to the fourth round of the year before were coming up, and it became quietly clear that everybody felt I was at a crucial stage in the long, costly grieving process, and I wasn't going to get to go with the contingent to Indianapolis unless I could figure out some last ditch way to deliver the emotional goods to this guy. I was totally desperate. A wreck. So you schlepped on down to the weight room. You and the forehead paid a visit to good old Lyle. Lyle turned out to be the key. He was down there reading Leaves of Grass. He was going through a Whitman period, part of grieving for himself, he said. I'd never gone to Lyle before in any kind of supplicatory capacity, but he said he took one grief stricken look at me, flailing away down there, working up a gourmet sweat, and said he felt so moved by my additional suffering, on top of having had to be the first of himself's loved ones to experience the loss of himself, that he'd bend every cerebral effort. I assumed the position and led him at the old forehead and explained what had been happening, and that if I couldn't figure out some way to satisfy this grief pro, I was going to end up in a soft, quiet room somewhere. Lyle's key insight was that I'd been approaching the issue from the wrong side. I'd gone to the library and acted like a student of grief. What I needed to chew through was the section for grief professionals themselves. I needed to prepare from the grief pro's own perspective. How could I know what a professional wanted unless I knew what he was professionally required to want, etc.? It was simple. He said I needed to empathize with the grief therapist, Lyle said, if I wanted to spread a broader breast than his own. It was such a simple version of my normal goods delivery preparation system that it hadn't once occurred to me, Lyle explained. Lyle said that. That doesn't sound like Lyle. But a sort of soft light broke inside me for the first time in weeks. I called a cab, still in my towel. I jumped in the cab before it had even stopped at the gate. I actually said, the nearest library with cutting edge professional grief and trauma therapy section, and step on it, etc., etc. The Lyle my class knew wasn't a how to deliver the goods to authorities type figure. By the time I hit the grief therapist the next day, I was a different man. Immaculately prepared, unfazable, everything I come to dread about the man: the eyebrows, the multicultural music in the waiting room, the implacable stare, the crusty mustache, the little gray teeth, even the hands. Did I mention that this grief therapist hid his hands under his desk at all times? But you got through it. You grieved to everybody's satisfaction, you're saying? What I did, I went in there and presented with anger at the grief therapist. I accused the grief therapist of actually inhibiting my attempt to process my grief by refusing to validate my absence of feelings. I told him, I told him the truth already. I used foul language, slang. I said I didn't give a damn if he was an abundantly credentialed authority figure or not. I called him a shithead. I asked him what the cock shitting fuck he wanted from me. My overall demeanor was paroxysmic. I told him that I didn't feel anything, which was the truth. I said it seemed like he wanted me to feel toxically guilty for not feeling anything. Notice I was subtly inserting certain loaded professional grief therapy terms like validate, process as a transitive verb, and toxic guilt. These were library derived. The whole difference was this time you were walking on court oriented with a sense of where the lines were, Stitt would say. The grief therapist encouraged me to go with my paroxysmic feelings, to name and honor my rage. He got more and more pleased and excited as I angrily told him I flat out refused to feel iota one of guilt of any kind. I said, what? I was supposed to have lost even more quickly to Freer so I could have come around HMH in time to stop himself? It wasn't my fault, I said. It was not my fault, I found, and I shouted. It was down to black street socks. I had legitimate emergency grade laundry to do. By this time, I was pounding myself on the breastbone with rage as I said that it just by God was not my fault that what? That's just what the grief therapist said. The professional literature had a whole bold font section on abrupt pauses in high affect speech. The grief therapist was now leaning way forward at the waist. His lips were wet. I was in the zone, therapeutically speaking. I felt on top of things for the first time in a long time. I broke eye contact with him. Then I've been hungry, I muttered. Come again. That's just what he said, the grief therapist. I muttered that it was nothing, just that I damn sure wasn't my fault and that I had the reaction I did when I came through the front door of HMH before I came into the kitchen to get to the basement stairs and found himself with his head in what was left of the microwave. When I first came in and was still in the foyer trying to get my shoes off without putting the dirty laundry bag down on the white carpet and hopping around and couldn't be expected to have any idea what had happened. I said nobody can choose or have any control over their first unconscious thoughts or reactions when they come into a house. I said it wasn't my fault that my first unconscious thought turned out to be, Jesus, kid, what? What? That something smelled delicious, I screamed. The force of my shriek almost sent the grief therapist over backwards in his leather chair. A couple credentials fell off the wall. I bent over in my own non leather chair as if for a crash landing. I put a hand to each temple and rocked back and forth in the chair, weeping. It came out between sobs and screams that I'd been 4 hours plus since lunchtime, and I'd worked hard and played hard, and I was starved, that the saliva had started the minute I came through the door, that golly, something smells delicious was my first reaction. But you forgave yourself. I absolved myself with 7 minutes left in the session right there in full approving view of the grief therapist. He was ecstatic. By the end, I swear his side of the desk was half a meter off the floor, and my grief therapist textbook breakdown into genuine affect and trauma and guilt and textbook ear splitting grief, then absolution. Jesus on a jet ski, Hallie. But you got through it. You really did grieve. And you can tell me what it was like so I can say something generic but convincing about loss and grief for Helen for a Moment magazine. Yeah, but I admitted that somehow the most nightmarishly and compelling thing about this top grief therapist was that his hands were never visible. The dreadfulness of the whole 6 weeks somehow coalesced around the issue of the guy's hands. His hands never emerged from underneath his desk. It was as if his arms terminated at the elbow. Besides mustache material analysis, I also spent large blocks of each hour trying to imagine the configurations and activities of those hands under there. Allie, let me just ask, and I'll never bring it up again. You implied before that what was especially traumatic was that himself's head had popped like an uncut spud. Then, on what turned out to be the last day of the therapy, the last day before the A squads were picked for Indianapolis, after I finally delivered the goods and my traumatic grief was professionally pronounced and uncovered and countenanced and processed, when I put on my sweatshirt and got to take my leave and came up to the desk and put out my hand in a trembly, grateful way he couldn't possibly have refused, and he stood up, brought out the hand, and shook my hand, I finally understood. His hands were disfigured or something. His hands were no bigger than a 4-year-old girl's. It was surreal. This massive authority figure with a huge red meaty face and thick walrus mustache and dewlaps and a neck that spilled over the rim of his shirt collar, and his hands were tiny and pink and hairless and butt soft, delicate as shells. The hands were the caper. I barely made it out of the office before it started. The cathartic post-traumatic like re-experience hysteria you reeled out of here. I barely made it to the men's room down the hall. I was laughing so hysterically. I was afraid all the periodontists and CPAs on either side of the men's room would hear. I sat in the stall with my hands over my mouth, stamping my feet, and beating my head against first one side of the stall and then the other in hysterical mirth. If you could have seen those hands. But you got through it all, and you can thumbnail sketch the overall feeling for me. What I feel is myself gathering my resources for the right foot. Finally, that magic feeling's back. I'm not lining up the vectors for the wastebasket or anything. I'm not even thinking. I'm trusting the feeling. It's like that celluloid moment when Luke removes his high tech targeting helmet. What helmet? You know, of course, that human nails are the vestiges of talons and horns, that they're atavistic, like cochiges in hair, that they develop in utero long before the cerebral cortex. What's the matter? That at some point in the first trimester we lose our gills, but are now little more than a bladdery sac of spinal fluid and a rudimentary tail and hair follicles and little microchips of vestigial talon and horn. Is this to make me feel bad that this fuck you up, me probing for details after all this time? Did it reactivate the grief? Just one more confirmation. The trailer's interior. There was some object or contiguous trio of objects with the following color scheme: brown, lavender, and either mint green or yellow. I can call back when you're more yourself. The leg's starting to prune a bit from the whirlpool anyway. I'll be right here. Got a whole foot to yield the magic with. I'm not going to alter the smallest particular. I'm just about ready to bear down on the clippers. It's going to feel right, I know. The throw, like an Afghan throw on the chin sofa, the yellow was more fluorescent than jonquil. And the word is asphyxiated. Kick some X shaped balls for all of us, oh. The next sound you hear will be unpleasant, Hal said, holding the phone down right next to the foot, his expression terrifically intense.